Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of the Collegiate VGC League, also known as CVL Seminar. My name is Jacob, or Corrosion, and this episode is going to focus on introductions, meaning what exactly is CVL Seminar, and information, so the fundamentals of what are restricted and what are metagames. This is my overview for the series. The primary goals are to provide a series of lessons that focus on introducing newer but experienced players, so basically people who know what different Pokemon do and are maybe getting decent results at locals, stuff like that. Or if you've been to a regional before, this is a perfect resource for you. But the goal is just to provide those players with resources, tactics, and advice that could otherwise be difficult to find to sort of push them along in their journey, as well as consolidate a collection of resources that are spread across the VGC scene into one place. And the second goal is to introduce CVL to some new people, and I will talk about that near the end, so please stay tuned if you're interested to hear what that's about. This is my syllabus, so these are the 6 lessons that I already have planned. I also have some more that I'd like to make, but just haven't really found great topics to cover yet. This first one is the intro and information, like I just covered, and my goal here is to sort of produce 2 lessons that tie into one overarching episode, right? So this episode and the next episode about team building are both going to be resource centered. The next 2 episodes will be based on analysis, then the 5th and 6th episodes will be based on mentality, and there'll be these pairs of episodes that focus on the same thing. I do not have a timeline for when these videos are going to come out. I am a college student, so I have a lot going on, but depending on how people feel about this first episode, that might give me some encouragement to sort of get the future ones out a little bit faster. And I would also love to get some guests on at some point. Currently, there's nobody lined up, but I guess we'll see. All right. I also need to cover some disclaimers. These videos are designed for people who already have some of the fundamentals down for VGC and are sort of looking to take the next step in their journey. So again, I'm assuming that you've played Pokemon before. If you're looking for sort of the very beginning, like basics of VGC, I don't think this is going to be exactly what you're looking for, but there is still some very useful resources that you can take away to sort of expedite the process of learning. I do not have the accolades of a lot of other VGC channels. My best result at a regional is 5.4. So, not bad, but not great. But I have put a lot of time into making sure that this information is accurate and insightful and will actually give you some useful information. And additionally, there's going to be minimal edits just because I don't have access to an editing software. So if there are some small pauses or stutters that I have, please excuse me. All right, let's get actually into the content. So these are what I'm planning on talking about. There will be timestamps in the description if you want to go back to a specific section or skip something. But the main things I'm going to cover are what are restricted, what makes restricted formats different, a comparison of Regulation H and Regulation G, the viability of non-restricteds, how does a metagame work, how can you follow the metagame, and then a summary and my YouTube obligated shilling. Let's get right into it. So, what are restricteds? Restricteds are essentially the legendaries on the box of most of the games, or the quote-unquote villain Pokemon. So, some examples of villains might be Giratina, Necrozma, Eternatus, stuff like that, or Kyurem as well. And then the box art legendaries, you can see, Lugia and Ho-Oh, Kyogre and Groudon, Dialga and Palkia, all those legendaries. The reason they're considered restricteds is because they have significantly higher stats than a lot of the non-restricteds, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but all these images you can see here are all of the restricteds in Scarlet and Violet. There's a couple that are not in Scarlet and Violet that are also restricteds. Xerneas and Yveltal are probably the 2 big ones, and there's also Zygarde, but they're not in the game. And these are the ones that actually matter. And some of these are pretty fringe, like White Kirim and Necrozma Dawnwings are on the cusp of viability, I would say, but I decided to include them just to branch out a little bit. So, like I just mentioned, Restricted's average power is noticeably higher than non-Restricted's, and because of this, you're only allowed to have a certain amount of Restricteds on your team based on the format. In a non-restricted format, that is 0. In a mono-restricted format, that is 1, and in a dual-restricted format, that is 2. There was this one format at like the very end of Sword and Shield where you were allowed to have as many restricteds on a team as you wanted, but that was just because there were no official tournaments at the time, so don't worry about that. And just as an example of what exactly that power difference can look like, this is just a comparison of the base stat total of Zamazenta Crowned, which is a restricted legendary, Urshifu, and both forms have the same stats, so either one works, which is a non-restricted legendary, and then Rillaboom, which is a non-restricted non-legendary. And you can see the jump between Zamazenta and Urshifu is over 100 base stat points, right? That's not even including strong abilities, strong attacks, all those things. I want to develop a little bit more what I mean when I say mono-restricted and dual-restricted. So like I said, mono-restricted, you're only allowed to have one restricted legendary on your team. But that leads to a very matchup dependent format where if your restricted has difficulties with your opponent's team, you're sort of on the back foot right away because your most powerful piece is inefficient. The teams are typically built in a way that enables your one restricted to do what it's good at, right? So there's a lot of teams that are built in this protect the president style, which is something I'll cover in a bit, where the restricted is there as almost the sole source of damage, and the rest of the team is built in a way to facilitate the restricted dealing all of that damage. But there are also teams that use a non-restricted damage source to complement the restricted. In a dual restricted format, the sort of meta shifts a little bit. The team is then focused on the core of the restricteds, and the matches won't be as matchup dependent because as long as your team is built well, at least one of your restricteds will be good in that matchup. The restricteds are used to complement each other's damage, so typically it'll be one hits physically, one hits specially, or they have really good type synergies, things like that. And usually you'll see that one of the restricteds, while still capable of dealing damage, is more support oriented, while the other is there almost exclusively to deal damage. This is an example of a mono-restricted team. Because there's no dual-restricted teams in Scarlet and Violet yet, this is from Sword and Shield, but the same principles still apply. And it kind of works out perfectly that the 3 Pokemon on the left are the support, right? The Dusclops' only attacking move is Shadow Sneak, and you're clicking Shadow Sneak into your own Calyrex to enable the weakness policy. Mimikyu also has Shadow Sneak to activate the weakness policy. Play Rough is probably not dealing very much damage, but you also have Trick Room and Will-O-Wisp as supportive tools. And then the Incineroar, while Flare Blitz is probably going to deal a decent amount of damage, you have Intimidate for support, Fake Out, Snarl are there for disruption and damage mitigation, and then U-Turn is there for pivoting. On the right side, you have the Regieleki, 3 attacking moves, it's there to hit hard. The Urshifu, 3 attacking moves, it's there to hit hard. And the Calyrex, which is your restricted, that is also very damage focused. This is an example of a dual restricted team. And once again, it kind of worked out that the Pokemon on the left are the more supportive tools, right? The Rillaboom's really strong attacking move is Grassy Glide, and you have high horsepower there for coverage. But you have the Fake Out, then the Incineroar also with Fake Out and Parting Shot for disruption. Flare Blitz and Throat Chopper also there for coverage, and it also pairs well with the Yveltal because of Dark Aura. Don't worry about it. And then the Yveltal, like I mentioned, it has the ability to deal damage. Foul Play and Sucker Punch are going to hit really hard. Oblivion Wing is a strong move, but then there's Snarl, which gives you some damage mitigation. On the right side, once again, there's a Regieleki. Electro Web is a little bit more supportive, but Rising Voltage and Hyper Beam are there really just to hit hard. The Landorus is there pretty much exclusively to hit hard, and the Calyrex is the more damage-oriented restricted. This time it has a setup move, but the logic is the same. So what is different about restricted formats? The main difference is teams can lean into, like I mentioned before, this protect the president style, where the restricted is there to deal the damage and the rest of the team is there to enable the restricted to deal the damage. That's not always going to be the case. Like in those two teams that we just saw, there's still other sources of damage, but they're not as strong as the restricted. And there's also this belief that the restricteds sort of box out a lot of non-restricteds from being playable. And while this is true for some Pokemon, there's a lot of niche tools that non-restricteds can provide that become more valuable in a restricted format. This is a local that I saw while I was working on this project, and there might be some Pokemon that stand out to you. These are the ones that stand out to me, and I especially want to talk about the Bastiodon, because even in Regulation H, nobody was using Bastiodon. It's not a very good Pokemon at all, but it just happens to have this very specialized moveset that allows it to function in a restricted format when you need it to beat one or two specific tools that the restricted might struggle with, right? There's also the Okidogi, which is a very niche option. Latios is pretty niche, although it was better in the past. And Iron Bundle also in the restricted format has kind of disappeared, but there's a reason to use it, right? Next, I want to talk about, play styles. Typically, hyper offense and balanced teams are going to succeed more over defensive ones, and there's a handful of reasons for that, but the two main reasons in restricted formats is Urshifu and strong spread moves. So Urshifu has the Unseen Fist ability, which allows it to just ignore protect altogether, and when you're playing defensive teams, you kind of need to be able to protect. And then in terms of the spread moves, it's a lot more difficult to handle a Pokemon when it's hitting both of your Pokemon at one time, because you need two defensive pieces on the team that can handle that as opposed to just one. And you also have to deal with the partner either boosting the damage or complementing the damage. It's just a lot for defensive teams to handle. Typically, the way that you're going to deal with these powerful Pokemon is just by moving before them and KOing them before they can really do anything to you. I next want to talk about the main differences between Regulation H and Regulation G. So obviously restricted Pokemon were not allowed in Regulation H, but alongside that, the other legendaries and paradoxes were not allowed. So powerful Pokemon like Urshifu, Ogerpon, and Fluttermane were not usable. Because of this, a lot of the weaker Pokemon that were not really getting their time in the spotlight sort of filled the vacuum. So Sneasler was used sort of a quote-unquote replacement for Urshifu. Archaludon was able to shine in the format because the power was just so much lower. And this is a perfect example of that. Sneasler's usage for the last Regulation H regional in North America, 39%, just over 39%. But at the World Championships, which was Regulation G, it was selected one time. I want to also talk about some standouts for Pokemon that become drastically better in restricted formats. So I'm going to start with Pelipper. I want to talk about Clefairy a little bit later. Pelipper was still seeing play in Regulation H, but the way that it plays is very different. In Regulation H, it was more of an offensive piece. You would use it to get the rain up to activate Archaludon's Electroshot, Basculegion, Swift Swim, all these things. But in Regulation G, the primary role of Pelipper is really just to get the rain up and then click Wide Guard if you need it, right? Occasionally you're going to click Weather Ball when you have the opportunity, same with Hurricane, but a lot of the times you're just sort of protecting to stay safe and then Wide Guarding in front of the Calyrexes or Miraidons, Discharge or Dazzling Gleam, Terrastar Storm, all those things. The reason that this change happens is just because there are two very powerful restricteds, Groudon and Koraidon, that compete with the Sun, and it's a lot easier for teams like Calyrex Ice that have that big fire weakness to manage them if they can just get rid of the Sun, right? Farigiraf is in a similar position. I think Farigiraf sort of fills the role of Porygon 2 in Regulation H, which is something I'll cover on the next slide as well. Armor Tail is just so much more valuable in a restricted format because if your restricted is not attacking for a turn, you're losing so much more damage than if any other Pokemon is not attacking. So being able to, for example, give Miraidon a choice specs means it can't protect in front of Fake Out, but if you have Farigiraf on the field, you're immune to Fake Out anyway, right? There's this big, like, you're blocking a lot of the disruption that the restricted would otherwise have to get around in order to do what it wants to do by having Armor Tail on the field. Additionally, the normal typing is really beneficial because Calyrex Shadow Rider is clicking Astral Barrage, which is a ghost move, but because you're a normal type, you're immune. I'm going to use Clefairy and Clefable as sort of this, what I considered the best example of the differences between non-restricted and restricted formats. The reason that Clefable was seeing play in non-restricted formats was because Dondozo was such a popular selection, and Clefable has Unaware. Clefairy has the ability Friend Guard, which in a format with so many spread moves, you want Friend Guard instead of Unaware because you can reduce the damage that your restricted is taking, or you can make it easier for your non-restricted pieces to handle a restricted Pokemon. They both have Follow Me, so that's not any X factor there, but just the difference in what is popular in the format means that you are going to prefer one or the other, right? Regulation G, Dondozo is not as popular. You don't need Unaware as much. But in Regulation H, when Dondozo was very popular, Friend Guard wasn't as important, and having Unaware to stop Dondozo was extremely valuable. Like I mentioned with Farigiraf, Porygon 2's sort of recent fall off is mainly because it's trying to compete with Farigiraf and can't really keep up because it doesn't have Armor Tail. They fill very similar roles, right? Normal type Trick Room setters that are defensive. Porygon 2 also has download as a little bit of an X factor, but a lot of the times you can't control what stat boost you're getting, so it can be a little bit tricky. But again, that X factor that Farigiraf has in Armor Tail is so much more valuable than what Porygon can do that it's sort of getting out competed. And then Archaludon, I talked very briefly about this, where in Regulation H, it was sort of able to get away with stacking Electroshock boosts and stacking Stamina boosts and becoming this like unkillable beast on the field. But in Regulation G, it really struggles to keep up with a lot of the restricteds. A lot of the viable restricteds are hitting on the special side, which Archaludon is weak on. And by the time you get enough special attack boosts or defense boosts to start really threatening the restricted, you've probably already committed so many resources and you're so far behind that it's not worth it. Next, I'm going to talk about what exactly is a metagame, and I have run through this slide the most out of any of them. I've tried really hard to get a succinct description of a metagame because it's very tricky to break down, but this is the best I can do, so hopefully it makes sense. I want you to imagine a game where there are 3 playable archetypes, right? In this example, it's going to be Triangle, Diamond, and Star. Triangle is used 40% of the time, Diamond is used 25% of the time, and Star is used 35% of the time. And they all have a winning matchup and a losing matchup into each other. So Triangle is good against Diamond, which is good against Star, which is good against Triangle, right? In this metagame, despite Triangle being the most popular, it is arguably the worst positioned in this metagame because its winning matchup is the least popular and its losing matchup is the second most popular. So going into an event where you have the option to choose between these 3 options, you would not want to select Triangle because it's going to give you the most difficult time winning an event, right? Most of the time you're going to be hitting either a mirror match or you'll be playing a losing matchup. With Star, it's almost the opposite, where your best matchup is the most popular and your worst matchup is the least popular, meaning the best choice would be to choose Star, right? And then with Diamond, your worst matchup is the most popular, So that's a downside. But your best matchup is the second most popular. So there's a little bit of a niche there for why you would pick it. But all in all, Star would be the best selection for the metagame because over the course of an event, it would be the most likely to succeed. Most of the time, you're going to be hitting a matchup you want to play, and you'll be avoiding matchups you don't. Right? Now, for Pokemon, if you want to follow the metagame, these are some resources that I highly recommend. So there's Victory Road. They host a lot of online tournaments, and it's a great resource for finding the results of regionals and stuff like that. The next banner is LabMouse, which is my personal favorite website. There's a lot of results for online tournaments, regionals, internationals, worlds, all those things. You can see what placed, what or who placed, what team they were using, who they played, what team their opponents were using, all those things. It's a great resource for finding new teams or new ideas. And then Davon Corp is a relatively new source, and as far as I'm aware, the goal of Davon Corp is to basically fill the role of what Nugget Bridge was previously, which is this archive of Pokemon history. There's a lot of team reports on there. There's a lot of other useful websites that you can find there, like PARS, which I did not include on here, but that is a data collection Google Sheet that you can use to track the progress and success of a certain team. And then for the ones without banners, aka they have Twitter logos that I can't access because I don't have a Twitter account. Munch Stats and Munch Teams. If you find one, you'll find the other. Munch Stats is a website that shows you the most popular amount of EV investment Pokemon have. Stat Crusher is a very similar website, so you can just use one of the two. And then Munch Teams, similar to LabMouse, has a lot of different full teams that you can look at. Then the Nerd of Now Damage Calculator, my personal recommendation for calculators. There's a couple others that you can use, but the Nerd of Now calculator was built with VGC as the focus, unlike some of those which have the focus of singles. So it's a great resource for if you're working on team building and you want to verify something. Highly recommend it. There's also a handful of YouTube channels you can follow. These are some recommendations that I have. I will admit, though, some of these channels upload more frequently and consistently than others. So if you're going to check out any of these channels, be sure to check the most recent video they made, because some of them haven't made any videos in a handful of months. But that being said, if you're looking for live commentary on a team, James Baek, great resource for that. If you want meta discussion, OHKO Pod, Joe UX9 are great for that. Justin Tang also makes a lot of videos discussing the results of tournaments or anything like that. And if you're looking for some more like history-based videos, if you want to look back on VGC maybe for inspiration, Sempra makes a lot of like top 10 style videos as well as some showdown ladder. Then these are the personal like big three that I would recommend for newer players. Tub Takes is a podcast where there's a handful of top level players hosted by Adi, and it's a great resource for looking at like where's the metagame headed, how exactly did a tournament end the way that it did, things like that. CloverBells makes a lot of videos discussing how teams are being built in the metagame. So if you're looking at a specific restricted Pokemon and you want to get some ideas on how to use it, CloverBells is a great resource for that. And then Cybertron does a lot of live commentary videos on the in-game ladder. So if a team that you've been looking at is featured in a Cybertron video, you're in good hands. He is, I think, the best at breaking down exactly what he's doing and why. So you'll get a lot of very valuable insight there. I will warn you, though, sometimes teams that he features will riddle the ladder for a week or so after the video comes out, so be prepared for that. All right, let's go over the main points that I want to really drive home. So for the CVL seminar, currently there are 6 episodes planned. I do not have a timeline, but there will be more. In terms of restricteds, their power warps the game around them, right? Different tools are required to handle them. than would be necessary otherwise. And the value of different non-restricted tools change based on the power level of the format. And then for the metagame, the same format's metagame can shift from week to week, right? So those 3 examples I used for 40%, 25%, 35%, those numbers are going to be constantly shifting. And there are also some things that I didn't cover in the metagame, such as what happens if a 4th archetype is introduced, or what happens if one of those archetypes is determined to just not be playable anymore. All those things take into effect when you're discussing the metagame. I just tried to simplify it as best as I could. And now I have to shill. So, I want to quickly talk about CVL. It is the Collegiate VGC League. It is for active college students or people who graduated college within 2 years. That includes master's degrees, all those things. If you were in school within 2 years, you are eligible to play. Signups for season 6 are, it says quickly approaching, but they're actually out. So if you're interested in competing, the Discord link will be the top of the description, and then you can find the sign up sheet through that Discord. If you sign up, you will be put on a team that's guaranteed. So if you're looking to make some friends that are also college students or just get more practice with VGC, please sign up. I would also like to thank the rest of the CVL staff, Anna, Luminex, Kelly, Temporal, and Squirrel. Thank you to all the people who worked on these incredible resources. I am not trying to claim that I made any of these. All I did was collect them and put them here. So thank you to everybody who puts their time into these tools and to the YouTube channels and all those things. And lastly, thank you. Thank you for watching. Hopefully this was insightful in some way, and you now have some resources that you maybe didn't before. That's it.